In the periods before the total transformation of your reality, you frequently perceive that your world is in ruins. What previously transmitted security begins to dissolve. Functions once known now feel strange. Desires that once ignited your mind are now extinguished. Individuals who once understood you begin to distance themselves or no longer truly recognize you. And behind all of this, a peculiar magnetism begins to emerge. A murmur you cannot identify. A sensation of dispersion arises. You feel disoriented, yet something genuine exists beyond this fog. It's as if a superior force is operating beneath your consciousness, reorganizing your trajectory while refusing to reveal the reason. This is an intrinsic characteristic of reality transitions. They never present themselves with clarity. They arrive disguised as discomfort, as endings, as silence. And if you're living through this currently, you might interpret it as punishment. But what if it's a form of preparation? What if this chaos signals the testing of your readiness to receive what's coming? Caterpillars don't become butterflies through force. They dissolve. They abandon everything they believe themselves to be. The cosmos doesn't examine us through logic. It evaluates us through enigma. In this video, we'll investigate these secrets, the hidden initiations, the soul-level tests that existence delivers to you just before everything transforms. And by the end, you'll perceive why what appears to be falling apart might be exactly the indication that you're rebuilding yourself. Carl Jung never viewed suffering as something devoid of purpose. For him, it was like a crack in the ego, always sufficient for the soul to manifest itself. He maintained that the unconscious is a force in movement constantly seeking wholeness, rather than a repository of repressed memories. And when we stand at the edge of a turning point, this unconscious doesn't express itself through logic. It communicates through signs. These challenges that suddenly arise are transitions of the psyche. Jung called this mechanism individuation, the journey of becoming whole, beyond layers of conditioning, fears, and false identities. When life removes the elements that once defined you, this doesn't happen randomly. It's symbolic. Plans dissolve, your energy collapses, but these are rites of passage rather than punishments. Notice this. The unconscious is preparing you to awaken something real rather than return to the old. According to Jung, the true privilege of a life is becoming who you really are. But this process demands burning and rebirth. So if your life seems chaotic now, don't only ask, why is this happening to me? Ask, what am I being prepared for? Because before the universe changes your reality, it questions whether you're truly ready to live it. And thus you begin. The first test of the universe before changing your reality arrives through what can only be called the death of identity. This test arrives silently. You wake up one day and things that once excited you seem meaningless. The roles you performed feel like fantasies. You traverse your life like a ghost in your own story. Yet this signals the beginning rather than failure. Jung considered this the fall of the persona, the social mask our ego uses to survive, to be accepted. And when that mask no longer serves, the unconscious begins breaking its elastic bands. Suddenly you feel vulnerable to sensations of demotivation. This is exposure. It's the dissolution of the version of you that kept you stagnant. The universe often removes the things you clung to, titles, desires, identities, to prepare you rather than punish you. Because you cannot enter a new reality dragging the weight of a false self. Like a snake shedding skin, this process carries pain. The ego will scream, but who am I without this source of pleasure, without this relationship, without this mask? Be conscious that this marks the end of who you thought you needed to be loved rather than your end. The truth is, the old was constructed for security rather than authenticity. And the universe, wise in its timing, knows when it's time to dismantle what no longer serves your soul's unfolding. This is the test. Most people try to return, forcing the mask back on. But if you remain with the unfolding, if you breathe into not knowing, you begin to perceive something profound. that the pain of not knowing who you are is an invitation rather than a curse. An invitation to introspection, to the search for who you were truly born to be. After the death of who you were, another trial arrives silently. It will seem cruel at first, but this test is perhaps the most angular of all. In moments when you're unwell, you'll extend your hand, hoping to be rescued by a family member, by an old friend, by a transcendent solution that falls from the sky. What you receive is silence. People don't fail to care. They simply don't appear in the way they used to appear. The hand you expected to hold yours doesn't come, and so you fall. Standard text. But here's the hidden truth. You're being taught to fly rather than falling. Jung understood this as the test of psychic sovereignty. The child within us still yearns for rescue, for someone older, wiser, stronger to make everything okay again. But the soul knows that true change depends strictly on self. This is the confrontation with your interior archetypes of mother and father, the energies you once externalized. Perhaps you've always turned to other people to solve your problems. Perhaps your identity was constructed around being saved. But now the universe removes your foundation. Friends disappear, masters go silent. It seems like punishment, but it's purification. This is the moment when the victim within you screams and the adult, the soul, must rise to respond. The shadow temptation here is to collapse, to beg, to pursue, to become small enough to be rescued again. But the deeper calling is this: you will become the one you always needed. So if you feel alone now, without support, know this. The universe hasn't abandoned you. It's placing you in a rite of passage, creating the inner leadership the next chapter demands. Fix this in your mind. This is passage rather than punishment. And now comes the most silent test. The test is precisely this: silence. You began to awaken. You released who you were. You stopped seeking rescue, and then you listen. You search for signs, a whisper, a dream, a clue to guide you forward. But nothing comes. No synchronicity, no breakthrough, no answer, just silence. The pessimist interprets that the universe is working against them. They cry out, but only hear their own echo. They meditate, but the mind keeps wandering. They ask for clarity, and all they receive is silence. But what if this quietness is initiation rather than absence? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious doesn't always speak in symbols and dreams. Sometimes it withdraws completely to teach something noise never could. Interior rooting. Because the soul doesn't flourish under constant vigilance. It creates roots in silence. This is the test of trust. The part of the path where no one affirms you, nothing confirms you. And the next step must be chosen rather than shown. The shadow reaction is panic. You want to force a sign, interpret the silence as punishment. But this is the old self attempting to reach. In total silence, old attachments lose their force. The mind quiets and the deeper voice, the one beneath fear, begins to emerge. It says you can continue, this is your calling. Silence is recalibration rather than emptiness. The universe is still listening, just speaking in a different language now, the language of courage. And courage means presence of spirit rather than certainty. It means remaining whole even when the world turns against you. So if you're in the dark, don't despair for light. Sit in the quietness. Let your roots deepen. Because sometimes the most sacred growth happens in silence, and sometimes the universe says nothing because you must finally hear yourself. And just when you think you're ready, when the path begins to rise to meet you, comes the final test. The test of the temptation to shrink. Imagine you're a flower finally blooming, petals open, roots deep, colors vibrant. But then the voices arrive. You've changed. Now you're too much. You've surpassed us. The light you claimed makes others squint. And suddenly you question whether you went too far, whether perhaps it was safer before. This test comes in your closest bubble. A person of the opposite sex who says the things you want to hear. An old job that resurfaces as a possibility. A friend who instills doubts in your mind about what you're doing. a family member who reminds you of your place. Jung saw this as the resurgence of projections, the shadow, the animus, the anima, and the ego, arising again, asking whether you'll betray yourself to be loved, appreciated, accepted. The danger now is contraction rather than failure, the temptation to dim your light so others don't feel small, to trade your expansion for approval. But remember, this is a test. The universe is whispering, do you really want the life you say you want? And your answer cannot be merely words. It must be decisions, the establishment of new boundaries and indifference toward others' opinions. You're not here to fit back into the mask that broke. You're here to transcend it completely. The shadow will say if you rise, you'll be alone. But the soul will say if you don't rise, you'll be divided from yourself. This is the final threshold because it's the most sacred rather than the most difficult. The world may stop applauding, the crowd may leave, but you, your truth, your becoming must remain. If you can sustain this, the next chapter doesn't just begin, it flourishes and blooms in its full luminosity. Without retracting, without apologizing, without returning to the past, just moving forward, just deeper, just more authentic. You've traversed the fire, the silence, the temptation to diminish yourself, and now what remains is this unification, assimilation, the silent labor of transforming yourself. So breathe, place your palm over your chest, feel the pulse of your heart, constant, sacred, unbreakable. Speak softly. I trust what is departing. I revere what is arriving. I'm being tested to flourish rather than be destroyed. Light a flame for bravery rather than searching for answers. Each trial is a reflection. Each ending is a purification. Each wait is a passage. So if it seems you're being examined, perhaps it's because your next chapter is grander than you supposed. And perhaps, just perhaps, you're finally prepared to live it. This is the resonance of the psyche, where the soul manifests in symbols, and the universe challenges you only to reveal your truth.